Growing your own food can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. And I wouldn't want concerns over cost to prevent anyone from starting their first garden. So today I thought I'd share my top 5 money-saving tips for beginning gardeners. Raised beds are very popular among home gardeners, and I certainly like them a lot. But if you're starting a new garden, building several raised beds can be quite expensive. So today's first money-saving tip for beginning gardeners is to weigh the pros and cons of raised beds before making the investment. To help you with your decision if raised beds are right for you, let's talk about some of their pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. First, if your native soil is very poor, you might want to consider raised beds. For example, if your soil is hard clay, very sandy, or full of rocks, a raised bed filled with quality garden soil will get you growing right away, while it may take a few years to improve the fertility of your native soil. Next, though our raised beds are quite shallow, taller beds are more accessible to those of us with back problems or other physical challenges. And if the edge of the bed is wide enough, you can even sit on it for easier planting, weeding, and harvesting. Other pros include reduced soil compaction and erosion, improved drainage and aeration, and at least initially, a weed-free area to plant in. Finally, one of the reasons we built our raised beds is that our garden slopes away from the sun, which is a significant disadvantage in a garden that's already quite shaded. So we built our raised beds to slope slightly toward the sun. Of course, the more your slope is away from the sun, the greater the advantage raised beds can provide. Now let's talk about some of the cons. Since this video is about saving money, we'll start with the cost. If you have to buy or build several raised beds and fill them with soil, it can be quite expensive, especially if you're buying all of the components of the soil that you're adding to the beds. A 4x8 raised bed can easily run over $100 if you have to purchase the materials and soil. And the cost adds up fast if you're building several beds. Also, if the beds are made of wood or some other material that breaks down, you'll have to replace the beds eventually. By contrast, setting up a 4x8 bed in the native soil using a no-dig approach would cost next to nothing. For example, the autumn before you start planting, you could cover the area with brown corrugated cardboard and then cover that with compost. You could also use free organic mulches like untreated grass clippings, autumn leaves, used coffee grounds, and crushed eggshells. Even if you had to buy the compost, your overall cost would be very little. Raised beds also have to be watered more frequently because water moves through them faster and evaporates faster than in the native soil. So raised beds will increase your watering costs, especially in taller beds. Finally, because of the small soil mass in raised beds, the soil temperature fluctuates much more than the soil in the ground, and it gets much hotter in the summer, and this can be an issue for some crops in hotter climates. Once again, here are the pros and cons of raised beds that we talked about in today's video. If you watch a lot of gardening videos like I do, you've probably seen other channels that have amazing gardens and they don't use raised beds. Charles Dowding's garden is an example that comes to mind, but there are many other excellent examples. So before making the decision to invest in raised beds, make sure to weigh the pros and cons. If you don't need to use them, you'll save a lot of money. Another major expense for many gardeners is fertilizers and soil amendments. There are so many products out there as well as conflicting advice that it's hard for beginning gardeners to figure out what their garden really needs. Fortunately, there's something you can do to eliminate a lot of this guesswork, and this leads to tip number 2. Before spending a lot of money on fertilizers and amendments, have your soil tested by a professional lab. In the U.S., low-cost soil tests are available through your agricultural extension, which you can find online. Where we live, for about $25, you can have your soil tested by a lab for essential plant elements, a variety of beneficial elements, soil pH, percentage of organic matter, and cation exchange capacity, which is a measure of soil's nutrient holding capacity. The lab will tell you if levels are too low, too high, and they'll provide recommendations on how to correct any issues with your soil. So at a very low cost, $25 in our case, you can figure out what your garden soil really needs, and perhaps more importantly, you can identify what it doesn't need. By learning what your soil doesn't need, you can potentially save hundreds of dollars in fertilizers and amendments in the long run. And you don't have to have your soil tested every year. We test ours every 3 to 4 years, just to give us an update on how we're doing. And our last test showed us what we pretty much already knew. Our soil is high in nutrients just from compost and mulch, and there's no need for additional fertilizers. 3 years ago, we made a small, one-time investment in a bare root Red Haven peach tree, and now we'll have peaches for many years to come with very little ongoing cost. Now that's a great investment. Money-saving tip number 3 is to make sure to include some edible perennials in your garden. Of course, we love our annual crops too, but they require new investments every year, whether it's new seeds, new plant starts, or electricity in the grow room. We don't even have to water most of our perennials because we get a good amount of rain and free organic mulch holds moisture in the soil. And we don't fertilize our perennials. We simply mulch them with free organic mulch like wood chips. So our ongoing costs are next to nothing. In addition to being a great investment, edible perennials are also some of our favorite garden treats. We're currently growing over 30 different perennials, including peaches, Asian pears, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, and asparagus. Our garden is powered by compost, and we've made all of our own compost for years without spending a penny on inputs. Money-saving tip number 4 is to make your own compost using only free inputs like kitchen scraps, autumn leaves, untreated grass clippings, straw, wood chips, garden waste, and used coffee grounds from the local coffee shop. Making compost can be as simple or as complicated as you make it. We currently use a very simple approach. We pile organic matter in a bin and wait for it to decompose. We don't worry about the carbon to nitrogen ratio, we don't turn it or even water it. We just wait. The compost is usually ready in 1 to 2 years. And to make sure we have a steady supply, we always keep 2 to 3 piles going at the same time. Of course, when you're starting your first garden, you probably don't want to wait a year or more for finished compost. And in that case, you'll want to make a hot compost pile. But no matter how you make it, there's a good chance you can make all the compost you need using only free inputs. And if you apply compost to your garden annually, there's a good chance you eventually won't need to buy additional fertilizer. The 5th money-saving tip is to keep the soil covered with free organic mulch. I like to use chop and drop garden waste, untreated grass clippings, autumn leaves, wood chips, and straw. Organic mulches save money by saving water and providing a slow release of nutrients into the soil, which reduces fertilizer requirements. Mulches also help reduce diseases like blossom end rot and blight, and they improve soil structure and increase populations of beneficial soil organisms. People are sometimes concerned that using organic mulch will attract unwanted pests like slugs and snails. In our case, I think we did see an increase in slugs in the first year, but after that we've seen a steady decline in slugs and basically all pests over the last 20 years to the point where pests are really not a huge problem in our garden. And I think that's because the mulch provides habitat not only for pests, but also for their predators. Of course, you'll see different results in different gardens and in different climates. So if you're concerned about mulch attracting pests, try using a layer of compost to cover the soil instead. And once again, here are my top 5 money-saving tips for beginning gardeners. If you have any questions about these tips, please let me know in a comment below. And for more money-saving tips, please hold on for another 20 seconds for links to OYR videos with more money-saving tips.